Welcome, thinkers, to Season 3, Episode 11 of Thinking Critically. Today's episode is Items. And today, I'm joined by David from the Shonen Flop podcast. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, David. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dan, for having me on the show. I've been looking forward to it. I always love talking about D&D stuff. So my show, Shonen Flop, is me, my co-host Jordan, and a guest where we take a look at some of the lesser-known manga that ran in Shonen Jump. For those who may not be familiar, that's where series like One Piece, Dragon Ball Z, Naruto got started. And so we really look at the series that just didn't make it big, including some series by some of those major artists. So it's really interesting to see what they tried before they were able to find their success, or sometimes what didn't work after their big success ended.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, because I'm also into, more anime than manga. But yes, I now want to talk about that. But no, right, podcast, D&D, right, okay. So today's topic is items. So what does that mean to you in the D&D framework?
So I really think that items are perhaps one of the most interesting ways to show your creativity in Dungeons & Dragons. And to me, while, to be honest, I feel like it's a mature thing to say, it can be humble items or, plot, but really it just means to me, what's the kind of cool shit you can give players that gets to change how they interact with the world and give them agency?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to come at you now. I'm flying out the gate and say that that sounds great, but it's like I'm a stickler for balance. So all I'm going to say is that is great, but it's way easier said than done. Or maybe I'm making a storm in a teacup. But in terms of like balancing, let's start with that then, because it's something that's clearly right on the forefront of my brain. And we all know that combat encounters and the CR system is awkward and Yankee and
Yankee. Is that a personal attack on?
No, janky. Sorry, apologies.
I was gonna say, my goodness, come on, you're a show and you make fun of us Yankees just because I'm in New York.
Passive aggressive, like straight out of the gate. Yeah, this is how this is how I antagonize all my guests.
Wonderful.
But it's very swingy and difficult, and you need a level of experience because blah 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 blah. But at least there are mathematical rules. There are clear-cut, give or take, guidance as to broadly what should be an okay fight, and then the DM can kind of muddle his way through. But for items, I'm just always so scared that something I'm going to give them is just going to have such unforeseen power consequences that it's just going to screw, like really just whip the rug out from under my feet.
Mm-hmm. To be honest, like, I kind of embrace it. So I do like 100%, or I would say 90% improvised campaign. And so part of it is they don't have a campaign they can really break because there's nothing I created. Like, for instance, combat encounters, I actually don't give HP to the monsters. I just think they die when it seems like an interesting time for them to die, which means, one, you don't have to bookkeep as carefully, and two, it means combat is always exciting because you never get into that kind of poke 'em in a stick stage of combat where the monster effectively is lost, but they still have 100 HP, so you have to play 5 more turns of combat. You can just have them die.
Yeah.
Or likewise, if the encounter is too hard, they don't know that you just nerf the creature mid-combat, I play a very high fantasy campaign where magic is very common. The players have a lot of access. None of my players, actually, in my most recent campaign, had spellcasting abilities, which is maybe why I think items make up for some of this. Like, for instance, none of them knew any healing magic or utility magic, which definitely made problem-solving very unique, so you had to be very environmental or seed them with items to solve problems later on, which you kind of reverse engineer based on what you've given them.
Yeah.
But that's what I would say, and I can totally understand how certain campaigns that breaks it, but yeah, they got nothing to break, so just let them have fun with the things you give them.
Okay, yeah, that works for the way that you certainly run that, like, improvised, no HP for the monsters. Absolutely, I can see how that would be less of an issue. And to be fair, that's something I need to be a bit more cognizant of when I'm like in the middle of combat and my mind is going a mile a minute. I really need to be like, fuck it, that monster's dead. Just move on, even if it does have 100 HP left, because that slog is not fun for anyone.
Yeah, I honestly think combat is probably one of the least interesting parts of D&D, especially before like level like 5 or 6.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really get exciting as your own character until 5 onwards, to be honest.
Yeah.
In terms of what abilities you've got that you can do more than once.
Oh yeah, like, oh no, I'm out of my 2 spells I know as a level 2 wizard.
Yeah, I guess I'll stab him with a dagger. Great.
Well, they do have cantrips, so
yeah, true.
So 3.5 fixed things a bit, but yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to bring up something that you mentioned there that was really, really, really cool, and it was, well, actually, let me loop back around to that. So, firstly, that idea of backfilling for shortcomings in the party makeup, which is something that happens, every time I see the post on Reddit or Facebook, some new DM saying, none of my players in my new group have a healer, and I'm thinking about this like it's a traditional RPG, and I need a quote unquote healer. What do I do? God, they're gonna just die straight away. 9 times out of 10, the answer is just give them like a bunch of health potions somehow or some way. That is the classic backfill of like, they haven't really got some reliable healing. Give them some heal potions. Some benevolent NPC says, "Here you go, you take them." What other ones have you employed? What other kind of items that are explicitly for that reason of trying to plug a gap in the party?
So I think really the big thing is just look at the wizard's spellbook and look at the utility spells. And that really can tell you what are the gaps. Like, for instance, Featherfall. That can prevent you from accidentally having other players die, So stuff like that, stuff like jump, detect magic, dispel magic, that if you have a party that doesn't have those spells, or if you have players that just are, I guess, are very single-minded, those are good spells to look at. So just think, like, if I was a wizard, what spell would I always want with me? And that is a really easy source of the type of magic items that will have instant utility for players that aren't spellcasters.
Okay. Yeah, so just like, I mean, I'm kind of reticent to use spell scrolls because to me they're kind of boring. I hope I'm not like freaking anyone out, but like, I'm not being like blasphemous or something, but that's just like a free spell. It's not. No one likes carrying around books like dusty old paper. I want to carry around a mace that shoots lightning. Like,
no, you can always add a twist. So, like, for instance, I gave them a feather that lets them cast Featherfall, but the way it works is, so you can only use it once per day. But the other thing is you activate it by saying a word for wind that you haven't said before. So you can be like Zephyr, gust, tornado, hurricane. So the players have to like think of words, and then like if they can't think of a good word, they're screwed. And that's a very like bland spell, but it adds an interesting meta twist, which is something I always look for too. Is like, how do I make these elements not just, I guess, interesting at face value?
Yeah, which is exactly the problem that I think spell scrolls have raw, is that they're just literally like, you cast spell, cool.
You're like, oh yeah, there's a wizard. We retained a wizard for 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, I love that idea. And now my mind is now racing, trying to think of like other examples of that. I guess that's kind of like soft meta. That's not meta in such a a negative connotation where it's ruining somebody else's fun, but it's just a nice little garnish on the side of the game just to get the players to think is a nice little touch. Although if I was that player, I'd get my thesaurus out the moment I had that item just
yeah. I'm taking a break from it now, but I actually did a word of the day in the Shonen Flop Discord where we had a channel where I just posted it every day. So yeah, I had words. So I was like seeing if they paid attention to the word of the day because I would use them sometimes. Like Zephyr. Zephyr is a great vocabulary word.
Yes, yeah.
For that,
there's a Zephyr Strike is one of the newer spells in one of the newer books that's meant to be pretty decent. So that just made me think of that for some reason.
I think it's my favorite hangman word.
Now, if I were trying to spell it off the top of my head, I wouldn't even attempt it. But
I'm just looking up how to spell it. Yeah, you go ZEP, and you're like, what? Is there a Y in that word? Yes.
There's a couple of R's, maybe a couple of Y's. Just throw them against the wall and see what fits. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing there that you mentioned was kind of like retroactively designing puzzles off of items you've given them. And that is not something I've heard before in terms of like always... anytime I've talked about puzzle design or read about puzzle design, even in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, it's always in isolation. It's always like there's this room that the players could come into, and you could put this room anywhere, and here's the puzzle, and that's it. But in terms of like they pick up some doll from somewhere, and then 10 sessions later, it's useful. I've not come at it that way. So have you got any examples of that process, that train of thought?
So that's a really good question. I'm trying to think just because, to be honest, the puzzles definitely are a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think more so it's not like you need the item to solve the puzzle. It just gives you an easier path, or maybe it gives you scaffolding on the puzzle where it solves some of the initial stages. So for instance, I'm just trying to think of a good example because that's such a good question.
Hey.
So I'm just thinking back on the puzzle. Oh, so this is going to be a really dumb example, but my players were given something called Fairy and Flurry, which they were in fantasy Hollywood, so it was essentially cocaine, and they were having to answer riddles, and they just bribed the riddle master with cocaine so he would drop some of the riddles. So they didn't need cocaine to solve the riddles, but it meant that it dropped some of the challenge of that because they just gave him cocaine instead of answering the last riddle.
Had you foreseen that at all?
No. I did not. But I was like, I mean, that's the thing is you got to reward players because when you're giving them items that aren't clearly specifically defined, which you don't want to do, you don't want items that literally they're going to have a very specific purpose and are not useful because D&D should be a sandbox for the players. And so that's what you do is you reward. Sometimes they get an easy win because they remember it's like, if you gave an item that's like an electric containment bottle because you thought, they could use this as like a power source, and then they fight a lightning element and someone says, I'm going to try and shove them in the bottle, and that just defeats like a CR5 rating in a turn because they rolled like an 18 on their strength check. You should reward them for that, for thinking creatively. And then in the future, hey, we shouldn't probably have them fighting electrical elementals.
Yeah.
Or maybe you do, and then they tries, and then you come up with a clever reason why it doesn't work that time. Which also is in our way is if they get over reliant on items, rather than destroying the items or nerfing them, which sometimes you still have to. But thinking of when are the times where you could say, hey, this isn't always going to work. This isn't the silver bullet you think, because that's much more rewarding and says, then there has to be a different solution if the obvious solution doesn't work. Which kind of makes me think a little bit about One Piece, if you're familiar with that series, the manga, in that a lot of the encounters generally have like a very obvious solution, and then he makes sure to show why the obvious solution doesn't work. So you have to think of a second solution, which kind of challenges the reader to really think of what else is available as a resource for solving a puzzle and, trying to overcome someone's ability.
Oh, man. I'm scared that like all my puzzles are just shit now. Like the few I've had and used out of almost fear of creating something that's a bit crap.
Sometimes when I want to break, I just park them in front of a Sudoku puzzle and give them 15 minutes.
Go to the toilet, make your dinner, have a break. I think this is good. I'm glad that I have you to talk about items because I can already tell that we approach the topic from slightly different points, which should make for a very interesting discussion. Yeah, of course. For sure. So to loop back round, then here's the reasons why I want to use that example you gave of fighting the electric elementals, and maybe one of them uses some item X to essentially mitigate it completely. And it's not that I'm precious about that encounter. It's not that, I set up a fight, so they have to have that fight because I set up a whole bunch of stuff, and if they choose to fight, they choose to fight, and if they don't, then they don't, and that's fine. That's the nature of the game to me. So it's not that I'm worried about. It's more that, for one example, is perhaps there's another person in the party who is an anti-elementalist, or someone who can banish or has is strong against electricity creatures, and then the gnome rogue rolls that one check and immediately defeats this thing, like it's a ranger's favored foe or something, and the ranger's like, stand back, I'll kill this thing, and then someone else just goes, boop, no, I did it, you're kind of useless now. That is the stuff I get worried about, because that other player then feels very impotent almost.
I mean, I think you should embrace that because, again, that's the thing is that you don't want to make them think that they're over reliant on the tool. So that means you're actually getting a reward as a TM for having it not work twice. So think about it. You could have it where they deal with one elemental, but what if they deal with two and they can only shove one in the bottle? Who's going to take care of the second one? And say, I found a weakness in what you did last time. Now's my time to shine. So I don't think it's quite as big a deal as you might consider. Just because it actually can set you up to show the strengths, even if at first glance it seems like the items given are hiding their abilities.
Yeah, and please don't pull any punches. One of the reasons for the show is I'm here to learn as well. So if you want to tell me some ideas, cockamamie, then please do. But
no, I think you have because these are definitely trappings that less experienced DMs could fall into, where they just have a solution and they just do the same solution to every single time. Because the players might get bored, but they'll still be happy, at least for the start, that they're just solving these problems.
Yeah. And I'm having an epiphany as we speak, by the way, because so many times on this show, we've discussed, like players having, their characters having faults and that learning from their mistakes and thinking outside the box and, leaning into the drawbacks of your particular character. And never once have I really stepped back and thought, how can you apply that train of thought to being a DM? And you've just given a really good example there of like, this has gone sideways for a reason I didn't foresee, but here's how I can leverage that it's almost like the job of the DM in a way to leverage those sideways moments rather than just leave them in isolation and just be like, well, that was a one-off event. God, I hope that doesn't happen again. It should be that's the learning opportunity there. And I harp on about learning opportunities for players, and I've not once really, stepped back and looked at myself to be like, yeah, but Dan, like, you got to learn it sometimes. Well,
yeah. I mean, that's the thing is that the players don't know what you're planning, so you can really change anything you want, or you can make it seem like anything is on purpose. That's the magic of it. It's like how modularity is probably the most important thing that really takes a beginner DM to an intermediate DM is learning. I can just reuse any ideas I had. I don't have to railroad. They don't know that just because I skipped a room, they don't know what was in that room. I can literally have it that the next dungeon they're in, I reuse the puzzle that was in the room they skipped. Because how would they know what they skipped?
Yeah. I mean, I've done a Warrenus Kobold dungeon, and they went to about 55% of it. And funnily enough, missed on magic items.
Oh, that's always fun.
And actually, on the previous dungeon as well, they missed a room at the end as well. Now, I don't want to encourage like a completionist attitude, because then that would be a bit boring and a bit tropey. But both major dungeons in a row, they've skipped areas, and both happen to have magical items in. And then one of them did say, "Oh, you don't have a lot of magical items down low." And I went, "Well, there were rooms you didn't go into."
Yeah,
a little bit behind the screen, maybe more than I should have done. But I was like, "Well, you never know. There could be more stuff. There could be less stuff." So they've skipped whole rooms, before which there was an item, a special poison dagger, I think, in a kobold dungeon that was fitting, and that would have been for the rogue. I had intended it, a good fit. But yeah, they didn't go that way.
No, so that's a shame.
It doesn't have it. And I mean, obviously, as you've just said, like, the chances are that it'll get an opportunity to buy it, or it will turn up somewhere else, of course. But the mystery of what they left behind is something which I think is really special about D&D. It's so easy to so I'm playing Tales of Arise now on PlayStation, the JRPG video game. And that is like, anytime you go into a new area, you can see the whole map for that area, and often places only have one entrance and one exit. So any paths which don't lead to an exit, there's an item down. So it's not, it's just like, oh, okay, I guess I'll go there first. And sure enough, there's some items. So it's kind of like there's no real mystery or exploration, because you know where everything is. You guarantee that there's some kind of item for you at the end of that corridor that doesn't have an exit, and the exit takes you on to the next area where you do the same thing again.
For sure.
So I love that in D&D you can have those. I don't know. I don't have a map. 9 times out of 10 they probably won't have a map. I don't know where the items are, and I'll just have to make do with what happens. But talking about, I'm going to toot my own trumpet for a bit, but such is life, about the modularity and the thinking on your feet. And there was a good example of that. And I'm I'm conceiving ideas for today's discussion in the middle of it.
Oh, you're giving idea thought birth.
Ooh, NPCs can act as you can think about them in the same way you think about items. That was the second epiphany I've had in the last 21 minutes. And the reason I just thought of that is because in the episode, in the session I just ran, actually, there's a big flying elven city up in the sky, thousands of kilometers above them, like Dalaran from World of Warcraft.
I'll pretend I know what a kilometer is, but yeah. It's like 20 feet, right?
Yeah, just like at head height. Yeah, no, very, very high up in the clouds. And they're on the ground underneath them. They're working on the gravity elevator, blah blah blah, elven magic stuff to go to lift themselves back up to the city. The city is currently a bit, being a bit Lovecraftian. Explosions happened, and there's aberrations and creatures, and it's starting to break and fall apart, and there's all sorts of horrible stuff happening. So as they were down on the ground floor tinkering away on the panel to fix the gravity elevator, I said the super perceptive rogue, who has a robe of eyes, never say I don't give him anything, who has a robe of eyes, I was like, you see a little black dot high above you seem to be getting bigger. And to cut a long story short, it was someone falling from the city. Now, my players, being paranoid fighters all the time, he was like, I ready my crossbow to shoot it if it's coming towards us. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Until eventually it got a bit closer, and I was like, yeah, and you can hear the screaming. And that was pretty much as I'd planned with that interaction. I was like, someone's going to fall, and I imagine they'll just let them die, because my players are sometimes like that.
Yeah, that's life sometimes. You just have a player die once in a while.
But no, they ended up rescuing the NPC through some very hilarious portal mechanics of dimension door and saving them and stuff. And after a period of, shock, where they were like, I was just about to die, and now I'm saved by a group of 6 crazy creatures that are shooting fireballs and stuff. Basically, that was their exposition machine to say, oh, fucking don't, man, the city's crazy right now. You'd be crazy to want to go there. And then they're like, we were just about to head up. So this NPC's like, nah, you don't do that. There's all sorts of creatures flying around and throwing people off the roofs and all that kind of stuff. So that was, I guess, that NPC was quite two-dimensional, but they served a very similar person that could have been achieved through an item. And
yeah,
I kind of like that. It's a bit reductive in a way to, there's more benefits to differentiating between the two. But sometimes, I guess what I'm getting at, sometimes when you think, an item might be good, maybe, a book falls from the city and they go, this book has fallen, which means that it's a bit messy up there. Sometimes that might be better suited to an NPC to be able to have a little bit more dynamism, a little bit more flexibility in how to have that interaction with the players, rather than it just being a one-way kind of mundane item.
Yeah, and you can always also just combine the two. So say, rather than it being innate to them, it could be an item. So like, for instance, the players I worked for, part of a wizards guild where they had a series of really powerful mages with an item called armor breakers. And so what they were was like +2 equipment that if you exceeded the AC check on a roll, it had an additional effect. So like, one of them cast Thunder Wave if you exceeded the AC by 3. And so that was just a really powerful ability that the NPC had. And hey, maybe the NPC gives it to one of the players after like a really big quest or something.
Oh man, that's so like, if say the AC is 15, they hit 15, 16 or 17, they hit.
If they got an 18 on their roll, yeah.
Yes, they hit as normal, but then 18 and up, they also cast Thunder Wave.
Yep. So like a cantrip or something.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I want to steal that.
So you just got to give credit to the Shonen Flop podcast every time
you
use it.
And because you rolled an 18, you get to cast Thunderwave. Credit to the Shonen Flop podcast.
Exactly, just like that.
I'll bring up a little watermark on my Discord camera as well.
Thank you.
Just so they know, yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
I know that is a very cool idea. So yeah, sorry. Thank you for humouring me there and listening to me go round the houses.
No, it's all good.
A brain just throwing out crazy things I'm thinking up on the spot. But yeah, I'm stoked because I felt like I've learned a lot, and we've talked about a whole bunch already. One thing that I wanted to get your take on, and again, this is going to be a decent question, I think, because of the nature of our games.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my notes was about pricing and pricing magical items, and I already know what your answer is going to be, but I'll ask the question anyway. Was that I think there's some broad guidance in Xanathar's, but really there's no kind of hard written. This costs X, or even blue items cost Y and green items cost X.
I never fucking know what to cost items. I don't even know at this point. Like that's another thing where I just make it cost X and I balance the entire economy over the prices I give players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I thought, that you would just eyeball it. Funnily enough, but yes,
Old man McGuppy, this fish man that just like, hey, you want to buy some items?
Yeah, I am a fool. Because funny enough, that when they were in that Elven City before it was all being attacked by Lovecraftian horrors, they went to like a little minor magic shop, and I'd set up a bit Machiavellian of me, I have to say, but I'd provided a number of trinkets and baubles, so we're not talking like legendary or even blue items, mainly just gold and uncommon, like utility, maybe about 10 of them, utility and aesthetic items. But the total cost was more than the current gold they had, which was as I said, a bit mischievous of me to meta it in such a way, but I wanted to force the interesting decision of, well, we've got a limited resource. What should we buy and how do we want to cut it? Do we want to get 2 weaker ones or 1 stronger one or whatever?
Yeah, that's always the dilemma, isn't it?
And to get to that, obviously to do that, to achieve that interesting decision, I had to know what to cost them, and that was a rabbit hole I was not prepared for. I mean, I guess I could have attributed, Danlo's own homebrew cost to these items, but then I don't know, maybe for some reason at that time that seemed like more work, and then actually trying to find the actual cost of the items was actually more work. So
that's true. Yeah, sometimes you just got to give up on that kind of stuff. Economy is just probably the most broken thing because it's hard to eyeball how much everything costs.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad it's not just me, because my economy is fucked.
No. Yeah. I don't even know if my players have a use for money anymore.
Yeah. I find that, I guess if we want to stretch the terminology, get the gold and items and treasure and diamonds and that count as items.
Yeah.
And I always did find it a bit weird that in all like the treasure tables and the rolling tables and all the loot in the books, it's like you find 2,000 G's worth of gold. And there was always a niggling thought in the back of my head that like, is that good? Because it doesn't sound great. Right? If you're playing like a one shot or even a short campaign, like 5 sessions, realistically, unless you set up there's a shop next door, which is kind of contrived, you may as well just skipped out them finding the gold and just
give them the money.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. Or it's in a longer term campaign like ours, where eventually money becomes completely redundant anyway.
Yeah.
So I just couldn't seem to find the particular game where that worked.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you always got to see what does and doesn't work. It also depends on the campaign.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, if you were running like Excel spreadsheet campaign where you counted and everything had a value and managing finances was an element, then yeah, for sure, I can see why you'd want to have it. But otherwise, it's just like nothing. It's just like you find the end of the dungeon. Here's 2,000 gold. Oh, great. It doesn't really strike you, because I think the problem is you need that in of itself in D&D isn't a reward. It's predicated on there being a way to spend it, which in of itself is determined by the DM. So even though you might have given players 2,000 gold, you actually haven't given them the actual reward until you've given them a shop to spend it in, which until they get there, they don't know when or where that is, which is just nothing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I did do in that research of mine, I did do a whole bunch of, I Googled and asked a whole bunch of people and said, I need to price them. And I got a number of good resources to doing so, both specifics and broad. Mm-hmm. But there's a ttrpg I'm looking at, a new one, and the way they do things against the Dark Master, and the way they do things, which you might like, is, from what I understand, they just there's no monetary there's no numerical value to money based on your your kin, your lineage, your background, all that kind of stuff determines kind of like a bracket you fall in. And basically, if something is in your bracket or lower, you can afford it, essentially, and that's it, really.
Yeah. It's also just like money. It's just weird bookkeeping where it doesn't matter until it does.
That's a good way of putting it. It doesn't matter until it does, but then it's not fun.
Exactly.
Another thing there then around rarity. So when you're Santa Claus and just throwing magic items out your bag left, right, and center, which is the image I have in my head, of course, relative to the Grinch, which is me, of course, hoarding them all.
Yes, that's very accurate.
If I was any good at art, I'd draw us in that situation. But so in terms of like rarity, then does that even come into your equation of that, or is that just...
I just give them an item I think they'll like. I mean, within the power level of it, obviously, if it's like a damaging item, you give them a +1 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also have an R system, so let me know when it's good to talk. Where actually, if we want to get into like what to do with the items that they just don't really use anymore, and how you find new uses for that, because I actually have like a recycling magical item mechanic. If you would like me to get into that.
Oh yeah, go ahead, talk about that. That'd be interesting to hear, because that ties into something I was going to talk about later on.
So what it is they work for the guild, and so a mechanic I came up with is because they kept collecting like different random artifacts and magical pieces. Is there is a forge, and what they can do is they actually can give different magical items to be fused together to make new ones. But what happens is the way it's fused is they have to call upon an elemental spirit that inhabits the items, and so it turns into like I would say like a mini boss fight where they have to fight a creature that represents what the new item will do. Like for instance, one player had a magic bow, a +1 bow, and he later got like a +2 crossbow, and he had like a healing potion of giant strength, and so he combined the two into a potion. And so he had to fight like this archer giant creature. And then when he won, he got this potion where once per day he can activate it, and it supersizes his arm and flies like a giant arrow out. But he had to beat the boss to be able to get that item. Yeah,
that is I love it because it's classic like video game crafting.
Oh yeah, it's 100% super video game in that.
Yeah, I love use the two reagents to create, but warning, these things will be consumed in the process. Do you want to continue? I love that. That's great. And presumably you're homebrewing all the resultant items because there could be any number of combinations.
Yeah. So that's just been a mechanic I really liked, and the players really love it because then they're checking. They're remembering what they have because they have to go through their inventory and say, oh, I could use this and this, and then it reminds them, oh, I forgot I have this really cool item. Like I gave them it was like a grooming kit where if you applied it in the morning, you would get +1 on your charisma checks.
Mm-hmm.
So they like completely forgot they had that item until they were like, oh, we should really start using this more,
mm-hmm.
as part of my morning preparation after I've done a long rest.
Mm-hmm. I love that is also reassuring to hear because I've heard, and it's the same with myself, even though they don't have the swimming pools of magical items your players do, even so, my players regularly forget that they're like, oh shit, yeah, I forgot I had those. Like, I think the rogue again has got boots of Elvenkind, and he just completely forgets about them half the time. So that is a very good in-universe way of getting them to dig through their bags and find out what they've got. Yeah. No, I love that. Just
all this random magic shit in their pockets.
I'd love to have them like, you should do something where they like overload the machine, or maybe there's like 2 like, incompatible items, or they've put 3 items in and something crazy happens.
Maybe. That's definitely an interesting direction to take. So far, I limited it to 2 because I also have to think of like items that.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Sorry, I'm now like thinking about.
You're just like I just want to play D&D right now.
The curse of running the show is often the case of what happens. But for those, I think that is a solution to power creep, I guess is one way to put it. So. And I think that's quite inevitable, especially in longer form campaigns where there's, you're leveling up from like 1 to 10, 1 to 20 or whatever, and it isn't just a one shot where the +1 longsword might seem, insane at level 3, but then level 7 onwards, it doesn't really make a difference. Someone's taking a feat and they've got +2 in their, their primary skill. So my sword doesn't even do that. So like in campaigns where there aren't so many magic items, or this, magic forge doesn't exist. What have you got any thoughts around like how to get around that? Or is your solution just also to be like, just chuck it, it just gets upgraded. It's just it scales with the players in a way. You could do a very video game thing where it scales with the players.
Well, I mean, that's why I have that recycling mechanic, because even if an item isn't really powerful enough, you can merge it with other unpowerful items, and that's how you might be able to get a +2.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what I've done, and then yeah, just naturally just find new tools and stuff. And also, the combat encounters are more, I guess, cinematic, so it's not super important that they need to become more powerful as long as they feel more powerful.
Mm-hmm. And how do you achieve that? How do you achieve that feeling for the players?
But yeah, so like I said, like I dynamically change the stats, encounters, I make sure they have weaknesses that play up to it. So, if a player thinks that a creature has a weakness and they don't, there's no reason why they can't have that weakness to make the player feel like they're clever.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
We play very different games.
That's fair. I just, it's like when you don't prepare anything, you should at least let the players get the most out of what they're trying to do.
Sure.
Because it's not like they have anything they're ruining.
Yeah. I'm so ambivalent right now because on the one hand, I'm jealous of your like freewheeling, carefree, low risk but high reward way of playing it. But then on the other hand, I'm like, no, but things have to be, undeads are undeads, and that's it. And they're weak to radiant damage, but resistant to bludgeoning damage, and that's it. I mean, that's my two sides of my personality are now very much in conflict. So thanks.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry to bring such struggles for your life.
Yes. First world D&D problems.
Oh shit, that would be a good name for a podcast.
yeah.
D&D First World Edition.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, trademark, copyright.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so this question then might be a little bit more up your street, in which case then, do you have a favorite item?
Oh, yeah, so my favorite, and this one just completely can break the game, it's called Nagram's Staff, where, do you have any guesses?
Well, presumably that's someone's name, but outside of that, no.
So it is a staff that when it touches an object within your size or smaller, or I guess medium or smaller, it allows you to cast Polymorph to turn it into any other object that it is an anagram of.
Okay. Oh man, again, that's like there's a theme appearing here, like a wordplay theme for you. I know I'm gradually like working out what ticks your boxes. Right? Yeah. Okay. I'm not very good with spelling, so as the Zephyr thing should have really painted a good picture of earlier on. So I'm struggling to think of one off the top of my head. What use cases have you had so far with that?
Sure. So like there was a golem where they were able to bestow life into it by changing part of the earth into a heart. So that's one where it's like if you just have to let it go because they're going to break a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's also the players, it's a lot of work to find good combinations. So it's really one of those where either they don't use it or they have a very, very clever idea.
Yeah. I can imagine it being, you can't really plan for that as the DM, I would say.
You just it's a good like one shot or maybe a two-parter where you let them think about uses, and then if they break things in the second session, it's fine.
It reminds me of like those video games where you can draw, you type in what item you want to appear, and it just appears, and you can use it to. It's that similar thing. Let me just completely change the world here. Okay.
Do you know why it's called Nagram?
I presume it's an anagram.
Of anagram, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm going to obviously in post cut all this out and say, well, it's an anagram of anagram, of course. Yeah. And
it actually would work differently though in the UK because you spell some words different. So,
well, mainly just the U, right? You drop the U's over there, which would make things more difficult, I would imagine. Man, spelling really isn't my forte. If that isn't patently obvious already.
Yeah.
But, I knew that you like as soon as I asked, you're like, boom, I know. Here's my favorite item of all time. Now I know.
Yeah. Another one I really liked is it was a fedora where if you tipped it, it would cast Zone of Truth. No one ever used it.
I'm just here to interrogate you, milady. Okay. Though I think there's a homebrew item in the campaign I play in that the DM has given one of the players, and it's a hat, funnily enough, and you can make like 3 spectral birds fly around it, like proper Looney Tunes comic book style of like you're being dizzy, essentially. And that's it. That's like its gimmick. What about then? Obviously, none of your own. Well, maybe some of your own. Maybe you did make some mistakes in the past. But in terms of like, let's go to the other end of the scale then, like bad items. Do you think there are any like, I know bad is subjective and relative, but I'll leave you to define the scope. But what items have you not enjoyed either creating or using or your players using?
So that's a really good question. I think really the problem is if you make items that are too complicated or too obscure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really where you get into that, oh, I forgot I had this, where they're not impactful enough, they're not interesting. It's also a problem where players will get paranoid about saving it for later, hoard it. I feel like potions are really the only exception where players know they can just use it because they are frequent enough. But sometimes, they'll just hold on to like a massive damage item or a massive buff item just because they're like, I don't know when I need this. Like this boss fight's going pretty well. I don't need to, give myself +2 for this combat and never have it again. So that's really why I've tried to weigh towards items that have weird uses, but are reasonable in how much you can use them so that they feel rewarded and not have to be paranoid about, is this the best time I can use it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing worse than having something and then not really being able to use it, and doubly worse if it's you that are making you not be able to use it because you're hoarding it, which is such a classic. That's everybody suffers from that at some point, be it in video games or TTRPGs. I think my guys have had a potion of invisibility for like 30 sessions, and
that's something the players never will use.
Yeah, I think I'll be knocking around in the bottom of their bag of holding for
till the credits roll.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe they'll just drink it at the end just for fun.
Yeah, well, that's the fun of the final bosses. Then you can just stack it on everything. You just do everything and then one shot it.
Yeah. So I think I definitely agree there that having reusable items makes sense because it lessens that burden of, well, if this doesn't work, I'm screwed. And the players have enough of that with spell slots. Like there's already enough of like, here's a 4th level spell. Shit, the enemy made this save. Well, that was a waste of that slot today, which which is already enough of a resource experiment. So I think having items that are a bit more flexible than that are definitely the way to go there.
Yeah. How about you? Is there any items that you regretted giving your players?
Ooh. So do you know what? Funnily enough, yes, one came to mind right then because you said overcomplicating items, and that is a pitfall. I like doing this podcast because I like letting other people learn from my mistakes, and this is one where I feel it's not egregious, but it definitely is one where in my campaign there are 8 or 10 basically super magical MacGuffin artifacts, and the players on the request to get them. They got one, and I think I'd bigged it up in my head a little bit more than necessary. So I wanted it to be like, oh, it does this, but it needs a little bit more. So it does this as well. And it's a suit of armor, but it does a whole bunch of really niche context specific things that really aren't getting seen the light of day. So it really swung from like, this is sick to, oh yeah, he's got that evil armor on. And that's what it's boiled down to, and that's kind of sad to have this. To have this like really cool big, centerpiece item boiled down to he's wearing big spiky armor, lol. And that's a failing on my part, which is why it's good opportunity to have these discussions and these thoughts because it's so everyone can not do that. But yeah, so it was basically like plus some AC. And because it was like, ancient and fiendish, he has telepathy with fiends within 60 foot, which of course has just led him to going, is it a fiend? No. Next enemy, is it a fiend? No, this is just the shopkeeper. Right. Is it a fiend? Okay, this one is flying with leathery wings, but it's technically a demon, so no.
That's usually how it is.
So yeah, that's led to just like so far just a disappointment, which is well done, Danlo, great. And then there's another one that means another ability where it's like if he is subject to an effect that would move him, so like Thunder Wave or even being just shoved, he is. I think he's just like flat out immune or like immune to the first 10 foot of movement or something. Which again sounds great on paper. It's like I can't be pushed anymore, except that every creature you're going to fight from now on won't ever have that ability. So finding those items, which, as we've touched upon earlier on, are like always useful and always fun to use, I think is tricky and so setting dependent.
Yeah, exactly. But you still find success. I would say more often than not, they're at least excited because it's just fun to find an item. And then when you give them so many, it's actually not that big a deal. Some of them aren't successful.
Really, really layering on the benefits here of your like multi-item ideology.
What can I say? It's great not having to prepare.
None of the others really spring to mind to me. The only other thing that I'm not super keen on is straight plus weapons, which is a symptom of not having as many items as you, because the few they do find, I want them to be spectacular, which I know after what I've just said, that even that fails sometimes. But to me, a +1 item isn't, especially they're level 9, soon to be 10. So
Mazel tov, that's a big level.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I'll let them know, because they think every level up is something they should be getting every episode anyway. But yes, no, I don't know. They just seemed a bit uninspired to me. But having that extra flavor, like you talked about earlier on, is maybe my fix to it's a +1, but it's a +1 and. I feel like there's a DM's Guild product in that, plus and or something like that. Weapon plus and or something like that is the name. That
sounds about right.
And it's a list of plus items that have got little flourishes on them to do other bits and bobs, which I know I've read before. A lot of people say, to give plus items some extra flavor is describe them. They are, like Dracula's sword that's ornate and this, that, and it's got gems set down there. But that's so... I love it because I love theming and aesthetic and stuff. But the moment you're in combat, and again, depending on the player, that could just be forgotten about in an instant and is therefore back to being nothing. So,
and that makes sense.
Yeah, I will think about this now. I want to go back and think about it. But on that, a similar train of thought, there are some items which are almost like essential adventuring kit. So, I mean, I presume your players have got a bag of holding.
I don't think they do, actually.
Oh no, come on! You can't spend 50 minutes talking about how many items your lucky players get, and they don't have a bag of holding.
Yeah, they probably do.
Well, it's upside down world I'm living in right now.
Probably give them to them at some point. At least it's not been an issue where they fit everything. Well, that's the thing, is they keep merging all their items, so they actually don't have a ton of magic items on them at all times.
Are they making a lot of use out of that thing then? That forge, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. I was going to say, like, I seem to think that basically a bag of holding is mandatory adventuring.
Yeah, it's baby's first magic item.
Yeah, for sure. But then that kind of begs the question of, like, for newer DMs, it's just lost in the Dungeon Master's Guide. But it takes a little bit of experience to find it and to see it and to realize that it's super useful and they should really have one, so on and so on. I don't know. It almost seems like it should have. It's like there should be their own section in the DMSG that says, like, these are really typical useful adventuring items that you might want to think about having with your players. What do you think about that? Or am I wide of the mark there?
Oh God, I don't even know how to take that one in. We've said so many interesting things. That one might be a little too much.
It's happened. I finally got to this place as a host where I'm bamboozling the guest with my incessant questions.
This filthy Yankee I am.
Because like every campaign I've played in, there's a bag of holding.
How many players put the bag of holding in a bag of holding?
Well, not many, because I think there's a meta understanding there that it's probably
not a good idea, but that doesn't stop players.
I was recording recently, and a guest was telling me that one of their players they had 2 bags of holding in the party. One of the owners of one of them went down, was killed or incapacitated and whatnot, and to transport the body, they slung it in the other bag of holding. And it wasn't until he was slung in that they were like, "Oh shit!
Whoops.
Didn't that person have their own bag of holding?" So I guess it can happen, benignly, innocently.
I just know people usually will do that, like to self-sacrifice themselves to take down a big bad. Is they'll, get eaten on purpose and then, create the tactical nuke.
Yeah. Tactical nuke. Yeah, that's okay. Now I can't have my players listen to this because they'll go out and desperately try and find a second one, and that's where I'm going to have to be like, "Oh, didn't you know you've got the only one?" Anyway, yeah. So all I mean is that, like, they're just like sending stones as well, which I I know, again, if you have a one or two spellcasters in your party, they diminish in usefulness as the levels go on. But for most newbie parties, it feels like they're just like mandatory adventuring kit.
Yeah.
What I'm getting at is if most adventurers need this mandatory adventuring kit, it just is like I'm struggling to articulate, but it's just like not boring in a way, but like just a given. It's not. It takes the mystique away from them a little bit, and I don't know whether that was ever intended.
I mean, I feel like you need to have some sort of baseline to really be able to play with it, because if players don't have a sense of normality, how are they supposed to know what isn't normal? I mean, people in the real world go hiking with the same things, and the hike is still exciting.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you do on the hike that makes it interesting, and who you're with.
It's the friends we make along the way.
Exactly. So I think it's perfectly fine if everyone starts with the same items, and there is, of course, times where you can play around with that, but yeah, I really don't think it's that big of a deal.
Okay, I might, because I'm longer term planning to run this campaign again. And where did at some point they got given them by an NPC, and I think I might just mandate in the next group of players, I'm just going to say, and you get the speaking stones and you get the bag of holding, and then just be like, it's done. And now I don't have to worry about it. Before we've even started, you guys have, who cares? It was a long lost relic, blah, blah, blah. Your grandma found it in the basement, whatever. Doesn't matter. You've gone. And then I don't have to have this, hello, I'm your friendly neighborhood quest guide. Here's your items that you'll need.
That's about right.
I had, again, this is going to be an interesting question, I think. Well, for me, at least. For you, it's probably boring as hell. But I mentioned earlier on the loot tables, the roll tables for you're in a dragon's horde, roll for what you find. Actually, this could go either way. Do you use those?
No.
Okay, good.
I already know what they're finding.
Okay. That's different.
I might pretend to roll though.
Okay. Because that's a very good segue there. Because what I was building to is I'm a fan of having like the magical items make sense, which is probably why there's less of them, because I haven't been to very exotic places yet. But I always like the magic items to make sense in the world and where they are, and it's not just like a random 9 lives stealer on a skeleton in the middle of a dungeon somewhere. Because that's like, what the fuck? Why is this? This is screw the rest of the dungeon. We're done. Like, so is that why you already know what they're going to get, because it makes sense in context?
Yeah, because again, everything is tailored around the player experience. So it's like, I want to try and give them. It's also when there are holes in what they can do. You don't really want to put up to risk, because this could cause legitimate issues for the party or make it that they have trouble interacting with future elements. So that's why you just want to give it to them, and then there's still a sense of randomness for when they're crafting these items, and that's when you kind of have to be like, all right, how do these two items interact? Which is effectively almost random, because you don't know what the players want to merge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for example, earlier on I mentioned that like dagger of poison, which was in the kobold dungeon, which kobolds are known for their crafty poison traps and daggers, and so that made super perfect sense to be there.
Yeah,
rather than like a bastard sword or a long sword or a great axe or something, which these 3-foot kobolds definitely aren't using. So why on earth have they got this great axe? So that's why I cherry pick, I would say. So like every magical item is predetermined. So I'm very much at the, it creates more work for me, because I have to go roundabout and be like, what would make sense here, but then what's still good for the party, and they have fun and get useful use out of. But it's probably more work than maybe required, potentially overkill.
Yeah, exactly.
And then finally,
yes.
And this should be interesting again. In Xanathar's Guide to Everything, they brought out they included a bunch of like common and uncommon magical items, like just aesthetic and theming and vibey ones. Do you have many of those? Not those specific ones, but those similar in style?
Do you mind giving me an example? I haven't read that book.
Oh, no worries. So there's like the Cape of Billowing, and it's literally like, as an action, you can cause your cape to billow, majestically like a superhero. Or there's a pipe of smoke monsters where when you puff, like it's like Gandalf's pipe, and you can cause the smoke to take the form of various things. There's the wand of conducting, and it's like, Wind Waker, Zelda Wind Waker wand, where you can just throw it, you can just wave it in the air and everybody hears music. I think there's one that's like it's a walking cane, but it can turn into just a regular longsword. So I know there's like stealth elements there. But most of them, there's like I call it a chronoband, but it's an orb of time or something that allows the person just to know the time of day at any given moment.
Oh, that's pretty great.
And also there's one for direction as well, a compass essentially that works, whether
it's not magical, it's just a compass.
But it's like if you're underground or wherever, it always points to wherever you need it to point to, blah, blah, blah. So those kind of like soft magical items that aren't like here's a mechanical benefit or here's something that could change the tide of combat. It's very much like I have a cape of billowing because I'm like, that's sick. I'll spend 300 gold and looking like a superhero all the time. Yes, please.
I'm not sure. I would say maybe one that's in that kind of tier was I gave my players like these RPG potions where they kept randomly changing colors, so when they drank them they could roll on the magic wild table once.
How did that go?
I think one got the teleport ability for 6 minutes, and another one grew 8 feet, or grew to 8 feet.
Okay,
but he was 7'4", so it wasn't quite as impressive as
that's the kind of growth that, like, when you see your mum next, she goes, "Oh boy, haven't you grown?" It's like,
yes, 6 inches. I checked.
Okay, cool. Well, is there anything you wanted to talk about that we might have missed?
No, I think that's really covered everything. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, David. That was very interesting and entertaining, and it's always good as a host to be, and I mean this nicely, challenged on my status quo. So I very do appreciate your joining me on this journey for this episode.
Yeah, I had an absolute blast. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It was really fun to be able to talk about D&D.
Awesome. My pleasure. Is there anything you would like to promote?
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to promote my show, Shonen Flop, as we talked about, where, as I said at the start of the show, my host and I read a lot of kind of usually pretty bad manga, but sometimes we find some gems with a guest. We've had some really fun people. We had Sean from Anime Out of Context. We've had Jeffro from Mother's Basement was a really exciting guest. We had Tim Batt from The Worst Idea of All Time, and we're actually going to have one of the creators of Dragon Ball Z, the Abridged series, coming on the show in a few weeks. So we've got some really exciting episodes coming up too.
Amazing. Awesome. That sounds very exciting. So, as usual, check out all the links to David and Shonen Flop in the episode description. I very much encourage you to check them out.
Yeah, we're on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Patreon, or and our website is shonenflop.com. Yeah, made sure as soon as we made the show, I was like, let me buy the URL for this. So nice and easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can find us on Twitter at shonenflopcast.
Amazing. So, yep, for your convenience, everything will be in the episode description.
Perfect.
Thank you, David, once more for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for listening at home. As usual, like, follow, review, subscribe, all that lovely stuff. Thank you all for listening, and good night.
Good night.
And now it's time for the Patreon shoutouts. Once again, thank you to Matt Street at mpstreet88 on Twitter for supporting the show. If you need support running your personal or business schedule, head to virtualtimehustle.com or on Instagram to make that difference between should do and done. Boss it better with support from Kat, who will help you get back that essential time you've been searching for. If you would like to support what we do and get 4 shoutouts a month, head over to patreon.com/thinkingcritically, or you can just buy me a coffee at ko-fi.com/thinkingcritically. I would also like to humbly request that you drop me a rating on Spotify, which is a thing now you can do on the mobile app, or just a like, subscribe, follow, shout out, tell your friends. Anything would be hugely appreciated, probably more than the other stuff, to be honest. So thanks again for listening, and bye.